I am Don Tess, better known as the Don of Beer.
And I'm M. Sauter, better known as Pints and Panels.
Welcome to the 8th episode of the All About Beer podcast. Every 2 weeks, we talk with leading experts and take a deep dive into one topic in beer. Visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer, and also visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer to support this show and others. This week, we're going to talk about mixed fermentation beers. Our guest is John Rowley of Rowley Farmhouse Ales. So, Em, you recently met our guest during judging of the Great American Beer Festival. Why are you so excited to talk to him?
So I've judged with John before a few years ago. I want to say it was like 2018. And John is just a wonderful person. He's really thoughtful about mixed fermentation. He recently won gold for one of his sours, where Russian River was silver and Jester King was bronze.
Wow.
So he's making some of the best sour beers in America today. And so I think he makes a perfect guest. He's also a chemist, and that's his day job. So he's got a lot of great scientific insight, which I know you're going to love, Don.
Yeah, I love that sort of stuff. And I love mixed ferm beers. I think that, the beer world currently loves hops, but fermentation provides aromas and flavors that you can't get from ingredients. The process of fermentation is magical, I think.
Is incredibly magical and so unique and scientific and very artistic.
Yeah.
And very romantic as well. And John has a really great eye for all of those things. So
now I'm thirsty.
I know.
Okay, so we'll introduce our guests and get into a conversation, but first we're going to take a moment to hear from our sponsors. And if you would like to help support this show, please send an email to podcast@allaboutbeer.com.
Hi, this is John Hall, the editor of All About Beer, inviting you to check out the Drink Beer, Think Beer podcast. It's available on all of the major platforms, and the weekly show features long-form conversations with brewers, growers, and personalities from the beer industry. New episodes release every Wednesday. Just search Drink Beer, Think Beer.
John Rowley is an accomplished award-winning brewer with over 15 years of brewing experience. After obtaining his BS and MS in chemistry from the University of Arizona, he moved to New Mexico to work at Los Alamos National Laboratory, where he's been working as a research chemist for the past 21 years. His passion is brewing, which a focus on live culture sours and mixed culture fermentation, and was successful as a local brewer, winning over 80 national and regional awards since starting to compete in brewing competitions in 2010. He served from 2007 through 2016 as the president of his local homebrewing club, the Sangre de Cristo Craft Brewers, which is an accredited and active club with just over 100 members. He enjoys science, baseball, all things beer, bicycles, and time with his friends and old but loving dog Buddha.
Welcome to the show, John.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So I'm not familiar. Can you tell us a little bit about Rowley Farmhouse Ales?
So Rowley Farmhouse Ales is it's a brew pub and small brewery located in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We opened Rowley in 2016, and recently we just had our 6th anniversary over the Labor Day weekend. We always celebrate our anniversary on the Sunday of Labor Day weekend, which was the day we first opened initially. So we're sticking by that. We focus on sour, and obviously the name is Farmhouse Ales. That's kind of a weird catch-all phrase, but we can get into that later. But we also make IPA because we have to pay the rent. But yeah, my passion lies in live lacto fermentations and mixed culture fermentations and barrel aging, of course, because with the wood is that magical 5th ingredient. It's also kind of like a side gig for me because I'm a chemist. I work at Los Alamos National Laboratory. I've been working there for 21 years, I think. I started right after 9/11. So I'm a scientist. I enjoy science. But beer is where I get to play.
Awesome. So food chemistry specifically, or?
No, I was actually trained as an electrochemist. So I work in batteries and fuel cells and electropolishing and those kind of events. More recently, probably around 2016ish, 2015. I started working in a newer field, some chromatography related work. So we do liquid-liquid separations using a device called a high-speed countercurrent chromatograph.
Oh my
And
God.
it's a little crazy. And we're basically trying to do environmental remediation and take heavy metals out of a solution and preferentially take them for recycling, things like that. So I'm trying to save the world one molecule at a time.
Beer, like saving the world by day, gold medal, GABF home, like brewer by. I love that.
I would make the argument that keeping the beer world well lubricated also helps save the world.
Sure.
It definitely does. It brings social
Yes, exactly.
What's the word I'm looking for? It's not justice, but it brings us all together.
We can't save the world if we all hate each other, right? And beer brings
true
together
that.
people.
True that. Ain't no time to hate. We just have to all get along and celebrate life because you only live once.
And drink good sours.
Sour beer is good. Good sour beer. I don't want bad sour beer. I want good sour beer.
Yeah. And speaking of sour, you very quickly said the phrase live lacto, and I wanted to ask if that's something different from like kettle sour or whatever.
Oh,
what
absolutely.
Live lacto?
It's completely different than kettle souring.
Okay.
Kettle souring is a technique that breweries use to try not to infect their brewery when they're also brewing clean beers in a co-located space. So say you're a brewery that relies on IPA and you want to make like a faux Berliner type of beer. You want to make a fruited sour beer because that's what your customers want to try or something like that. A lot of times people will make a kettle sour beer where they will pitch lactobacillus into their wort and let it sour in the kettle overnight. You know, it usually doesn't take long. And there's these modern strains of lactobacillus that can sour really fast. And then once they're done with it, they boil it. And so they're trying to maintain or keep the lactobacillus confined into that boiled kettle. Because it's really easy to clean the boiled kettle. It's not as easy to clean your hoses, your soft goods like your gaskets, things like that. So lactobacillus definitely can be a problem if it infects your brewery. I mean, we've seen this with big breweries,
right?
With Goose Island, that's probably a similar example, not quite the same, but you can lose a lot of money if you're not making sour beer intentionally. So the problem with that technique, though, is you boil off all of these secondary and tertiary compounds that are so special that lactobacillus gives you, and you're just left with lactic acid. If you're going to do that, you might as well just pitch lactic acid in the finished beer and call it good, because it becomes monodimensional. And so a live lacto fermentation is one where we pitch lactobacillus, but we never kill it. So we don't do it in the boiled kettle. We do it post-boil. Beers cool down, usually to like maybe 100 degrees Fahrenheit, something around that point, where the lactobacillus is happy. You pitch lactobacillus into unaerated wort, you let it rip, and then depending on the culture, not too long later, you have sour beer with other compounds in the beer, and then you finish the beer with brewer's yeast of whatever you want to use, some sort of acid tolerant yeast. You could use pretty much any yeast, but it may not finish the beer correctly. We typically use actually Saison strains, which you wouldn't think work well because you may feel that they might throw off a bunch of phenols, but typically they don't. And those things like French Saison yeast, any of the Belgian strains, they tend to be they behave pretty well and fairly clean in a low pH environment. And they can tolerate it too. So, yeah, when I say live lacto, I'm basically talking about a real type of Berliner Weiss, or a real type of Gose style, Berlin style, things like that. Not a kettle sour, because we don't want to kill the lactobacillus. We want it to thrive. We want it to live and go down your palate and give you a wonderful experience. Hopefully not too sour.
And the lactobacillus might be the same strain as somebody might use in a kettle sour. It's just when you're adding it and where and how you're handling.
We're not killing it. We're keeping it alive the whole time.
Cool. Okay, well, you've sort of answered a bunch of questions I was planning to ask you. But,
Okay, well, I'm sorry to do that,
No,
but
no, that's excellent.
Well, it was great having you.
yeah, thank you guys.
So, for those who don't know, what do you mean by mixed fermentation?
So mixed fermentation can pretty much mean anything. It could mean, say you want to make an IPA, you could use multiple strains of brewer's yeast, Saccharomyces. You might use a Chico, you might use a Whitbread, you might throw a couple things together. But typically what it means is you're mixing bacteria, you're mixing wild yeast, Brettanomyces, you're mixing brewer's yeast, Saccharomyces. And you may have other species as well in there, other microflora, wild microflora. There's all kinds of weird things that can happen out in the wild with spontaneous beers, things like that. So mixed culture to me, it really means using kind of the whole gamut to make beers that have a unique yeast character. So we're not talking about beers that are kind of bland, like in terms of like a Chico strain yeast or something like that, where it just gives you a clean fermentation, or a lager yeast. These beers are usually driven by a lot of different yeast characters. So you get some barnyard funk from the Brettanomyces. You may have all kinds of weird horsey flavors. If you're using Pediococcus, you could have also have lactic acid formation. Lactobacillus usually makes lactic acid and other secondary and tertiary compounds as well. But a lot of American brewers stick to Lactobacillus, whereas the Europeans tend to like the Pediococcus. There's other problems with Pediococcus, but that we can get into that later. But there are brewers here in the States using Pedio, like Vinny, Russian River. He makes beautiful sour beer, and he tends to use Pediococcus over Lactobacillus. But it takes a long time. So
okay.
Good things come to those who wait.
So, and I realize that I haven't given Em very much opportunity here so far.
No, I'm listening. I'm learning.
I think a lot of people think of sour beer. Like, I personally hate the phrase sour beer because it lumps together too many things.
It's very broad.
It's very broad. So
very broad.
How would you, I guess, Sour Beer 101, how would you tell a consumer to differentiate between lactic, pedio, acetobacter? Like, what should people be looking for in a good sour beer versus an okay sour beer?
So I think really it comes down to like the cleanliness of the sourness. You don't want it to be too sour. You want it to be more tart than sour. You don't want it to be like palate destroying. So some sour beer can be really harsh and it makes it less drinkable. But what I would want my customers to drink was something that they could drink more than one of and enjoy it along the way. So something smooth, tart maybe. So not to be too scientific, but there's multiple ways to measure the sourness of beer. So I like to talk about not just pH. pH is the common measurement. That's the concentration of protons in a given solution.
Right.
So that's a normal thing that everyone uses. pH is fairly common. It's used in food industries, used in chemistry, acid, all kinds of stuff. It's everywhere. But it doesn't tell you the whole story. It only tells you the free protons in solution. But there's all these organic acids and other features to sour beer that you really need a better way to describe than just pH. So what I like to do is measure, and not really for my lacto beers like the Berliner and the Gose, because those are kind of a little more entry level-ish. Those are meant to be quaffable. They're not, I'll put those in a can. I'm not afraid of putting those in a can. It's kind of a bastardization of the beer itself. Cans are a compromise to keep a consumer happy. Cans are not really the ideal package for sour beer, but if you want to sell a beer at a price point that people are going to pay for, you have to put them in a can sometimes. But the barrel aged sours, the things with much more complexity, those things I like to put in a bottle because that's where they deserve to live. So on the bottled beers, I typically will do a TA measurement, which is the measurement of the titratable acidity. And that measurement expressed usually in grams per liter is a measurement of the bound acids in solution. So all the organic acids, all the other secondary flavors that really make up a complex sour beer, what they are. So I like to talk about titratable acidity. Those two things are quite different. So you could have a beer that has very low pH. And by low pH, I would say in the ballpark of like 3.2. Anything below 3 is probably not going to be an enjoyable beer.
Okay.
You're approaching, a high acid profile. But 3.2 to 3.5, that range in pH is usually fairly enjoyable. But you can also have a beer that has very low titratable acidity with a low pH, and then that beer would almost not taste sour at all.
Oh.
So it would present to you as maybe a slightly tart beer, very drinkable. You wouldn't feel maybe heartburn from it. You could enjoy it without being aggressively assaulted by the acid. Some beers have a really high titratable acidity, and maybe the pH is still in that range. And then those beers become more aggressive. They become harder to drink, less inviting. You're not going to finish a glass of it or even a bottle. So I think it's really, it's probably difficult to describe titratable acidity to your average consumer. But I try to. It doesn't always work. But I think it's an important thing. And there are breweries that are doing this as well. Not everyone. I don't think the breweries making the crazy lactose in super fruited, like under fermented fruit sours, smoothie sours, whatever you want to call them, slushy beers. I don't know what you call those beers. I call them Kinder beer, but that's a separate issue. Those beers, they're not going to talk about that. They're trying to push children's cereal flavors at you, and they appeal to a different consumer than I'm trying to get after. I'm trying to get someone in my bar or my space to kind of enjoy a little bit of the chemistry, but the art of it as well, because there's a lot of art involved. It's not just the chemistry.
Okay.
When you started, I know you were a home brewer, correct?
I was, yes.
And you
was
were
a very
brewing
active home brewer.
Brewing sour beers at home.
Yes.
That boggles my mind that you were making, and I bet they were really good because your beers are great. What was the jump from doing sours at home, like home brewers and sours, to the big time? Like, that just seems, when I have a homebrewed sour and it's really good, I'm like, I want to shake that person's hand.
Yeah. And I feel like for homebrewers, they typically take the kettle souring route because it's easier. And
it's easy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've tried that. I think, at a home brewing level, it's not really necessary to kettle sour.
Oh,
unless you're trying to do something quick and easy. It just doesn't make a lot of sense, because you don't have a big investment in hoses and gaskets and paying for people's livelihoods. If we ditch a beer at a professional level, people feel it. I'm not going to be able to give people a bonus. Things like that happen. People's livelihoods are on the line, which is a lot different from a home brewer, which they have, maybe $100 worth of soft goods or something like that. You can pitch that and start over. It's not that big a deal. To me, I thought, so I had been home brewing. I was brewing stouts and IPAs and things that we wanted to drink here at home. I used to have a neighbor who was really great because he would drink all of my homebrew. Right. I wanted to brew beer and I wanted to drink some of it, but I didn't want to drink all of it because, that's a lot of beer. I had 5 taps at my house at one point. They're actually still there, but I don't use them all now. But, I was constantly filling those kegs, and I would want to brew again the next day or the next weekend. I'd like, I got to keep the train rolling. And he was really great because he would come over and drink a lot. And he was my kind of test bed person. Oh, do you like this? What do you think about this? Tell me about this. So I experimented a lot with the clean beers. And at some point I had a Flanders Red from Rodenbach, some Grand Cru. I can't remember exactly what it was. It wasn't the normal one. And I was like, oh yeah, I think this is really good. I want to try to brew a Flanders Red. And so I started reading into it. They take a long time. They're difficult beers, and I've always been drawn to lambic. I think it was there was an article when I was in school. It was like Scientific American, so it was kind of like this fluff piece. It's not a real. It's more. It is real, but it's not a real journal article or like it doesn't dive deep into a certain topic. But it talked about like the kind of the romance of lambic and how that came about and what they've done for all these years. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. I want to brew that kind of beer. I wasn't brewing at the time. I brewed a beer, I think initially in like 1988 with a friend of mine. It was actually in Connecticut I think it was near Storrs. His father lived there. We were drinking his beer. His father had a cherry chocolate stout, my buddy Steve. And we would drink the hell out of his beer. And he's pissed because he's like, you guys are drinking all my beer. I'm going to show you how to make it so you can make your own and stop drinking my fucking beer. Pardon my French. So I brewed a beer back then. It was okay. It wasn't that great. But then, I got into school. I got into life. I didn't have time to brew. I didn't have space to brew. But then in the, I think it was the mid 90s, I started reading about it. Like, I got to do this. But then again, life gets in the way. College gets in the way. But then when I moved to Santa Fe, I moved here in 2001. I started reading more and more, but then we started playing with it. And it just kind of led into, my original thoughts on those beers, like, oh, those are really magnificent. I like drinking them. I like the whole idea of spontaneous fermentation. It's just, so romantic, so cool. So I was like, oh, okay, I've got to start making these beers. Then, you got to realize those things take a long time, like a Roselaire type of beer. So Flanders, Oud Bruin, things like that. They're usually peak at like 20 months. So that's a long period of waiting. So you've got to wait, and then you've got to bottle those beers. I figured, you know what, it's worth the effort. Let's do it. Let's fill up the closet with bottles and see what happens. And then eventually it got to the point where, oh, I need to do more barrels, because this beer in stainless isn't as good as if it was like a Oud Bruin in stainless is typical, but like a Flanders needs to be in wood. They usually brew them in the big foeders. I can't, you can't really have a foeder at home. You probably could pull off a 7-barrel. It's a lot of home brewing though. 7 barrels is a lot of beer to brew.
It's a lot of beer, yeah.
And it's almost, it's too much. Why do you want to do that at home? So eventually my garage had some barrels in it, and it got to be to the point like, okay, first of all, this is illegal, but that not thinking about those things. You just have to eventually figure out a way to do it where everyone can enjoy it, because you're not enjoying it by yourself or with a few people and just bringing bottles to parties and entering competitions. I mean, you still have a lot of leftover beer at that point. So it's the natural progression for me was to become a professional, but I really always enjoyed those kind of styles. Wood aged sour beer is a beautiful thing. It may not be like the most sexy thing to the consumer. It's nowadays with other things that have gotten more popular, but I don't really care. I'm going to keep doing that because that's what we want to do.
Yeah, they're so elegant, though.
Yes.
Sour beers have, especially mixed firm, when you bring out the big bottle with the cage and cork, and
not so good
for the the table or for guests. It's a very it's a very romantic beer.
It's a proper way to do it.
Yeah.
Well,
is that how you do 750 cork and cage? I know you said cans, but
so we do cans for most of our clean beer IPA. We have a rye saison that's full time called Fields of Rye, and we do that in a can, even though that's a compromise for carbonation. But the price point is there for consumers, and it still drinks really well. So I don't feel too bad about it. At first, I was kind of a little heartbroken, but I've
I don't
learned
know. A rye saison in a can sounds pretty good to me.
yeah, I've learned to accept. Life throws you limitations that you have to work around. There's no way around it, and that's one of them. The consumers want cans. I know you can't do 3 volumes of CO2 in a can. Well, we've tried, doesn't work. But you can make a compromise and have a little less carbonation, and it still presents as a very good beer. And I don't feel too bad about that. But all the barrel aged stuff I want to have in bottles. So this year we did a bunch of 375s because we're kind of recovering from COVID, and we lucked out. We bought a canning line, a small one, like a $20,000 cask manual canning system. That was in, I think, in December of 2020, maybe, I think is when that happened, or not 2019. And then the pandemic really hit at like March of 2020.
Right.
And so I was building a table for it at the time, and I was getting it ready. We hadn't really used it. We did a couple little test runs. We were testing the seams, things like that. And then March 2020 happened, and then our complete business dried up for draft, and on site we couldn't sell any beer on site. We have a restaurant. That's a big part of our business is come have a beer, put your phone down, enjoy some food and beers with your friends. Talk to your girlfriend, talk to your wife, talk to your husband, whatever. Put your phone down. Just don't talk politics. That's one of our rules. No politics. And try to have a good time. So that we try to sell this experience, not just good beer, not just good food, but also like a unique, like, come sit down, have a beer, have some food, talk to someone, talk to your friends, talk to your family. That's kind of thing that's kind of missing these days. I think, everyone's on their phone. It's, we're all zombies, and I want to try to avoid that as much as possible. I'm as guilty as anyone. We all have phones. They lock you in, and you're like, ooh. I mean, that's just the way it goes. But our experience is we're trying to avoid that a little bit. And so we want to have beer commensurate with that experience. I think we do a pretty good job. I think we do a decent job.
Can I ask, you touched upon, CO2 levels, for example, but other than the ability to hold pressure, is the preference for bottles just an aesthetic thing, or is there some oxygen ingress that you like, or is there something more to it?
I think it's combinatorial. I don't think it's everything. I don't think it's just one thing. I think the barrel aged beers present better in a bottle. I think they taste better. The carbonation is a little more integrated because you can take it a little higher. And then when you have that kind of head pressure in the beer, it forces the carbonation to be more dissolved in the beer, and it forces finer bubbles. It's a more integrated experience when you're drinking it. So yeah, like a saison at 3 volumes is going to present a lot better than a saison at 2 volumes. It's just simple. Right. And I've seen it in multiple cases where a brewery sells the same bottle, or they used to sell a bottle in a 750. They've made it in a can. They've brought it down to 2.2 volumes or whatever it is. And the beer is still really good. It's just not bright. It's not effervescent. It's not, it doesn't drive itself into your nostrils. There's definitely a big part of that, especially with the beers that we brew. I mean, it's not as big a deal with English ales and things like that, where low carbonation is to be expected. That doesn't matter really. But for saison, for Berliner style beers, they like to have a little more carbonation. So it's not just the package, but it's also, I think, the overall experience. I met a guy. He's like, I think he's been brewing since 1945. We call him Jim the Elder. He's 91 years old right now. He brews every Thursday. He lives in Oklahoma City. He used to be part of our homebrew club. He would actually drive to Santa Fe from Oklahoma City every month to attend our meetings. And he's like, I really like you guys. You guys are much more fun brewers than these people with the stick up their ass in Oklahoma. No, sorry, Oklahoma home brewers. But I'm just saying, I'm paraphrasing what Jim said. But he really enjoyed us being here. So we spent a lot of time, 10 years with this guy, just, tasting his beer and hearing out his philosophies. The guy's been brewing since 1945. Holy shit, that's a long time. Thousands of batches. He brews every Thursday. He still does. I think I'm going to see him tomorrow. I haven't seen him in a long time.
What's he brewing?
He brews a lot of lagers. His wife, Van, is like a lager drinker. She's much younger than him. But he brews Kolsch. He brews German Pilsner. He brews a lot of like clean, easy drinking hybrid ales like Kolsch, things like that. A lot of German Pilsner. His beer is fantastic. It's like he's won all kinds of medals, Blue Bonnet, all these like Midwest competitions. He had like a Tamave that was beautiful. He brought it to a meeting once, and he won a gold medal at, I think it was Blue Bonnet with that. That's a big competition. If you win that, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And he gave me advice once. He's like, John, don't do that forced carbonation crap. It's not worth your time. And you know how old people are. They tell it like it is, or tell it like they think it is. It may not be how it is.
It is how it is.
This is how it is. John, don't fuck around with that shit.
Yeah.
Just do it right. Bottle condition, everything. And I was always doing that anyway. I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep doing that because I think that's sage advice.
Yeah.
And
okay.
for my beer, I think it works.
Yeah. Awesome. I have a whole bunch of other things I want to ask you about, but first,
same I do. Same,
yeah. But first, to keep the lights on, we have to hear. I shouldn't say we have to hear. We get to hear.
We get to hear.
A word from our sponsors.
Well, thank you, sponsors.
Hi, this is John Hall, the editor of All About Beer, inviting you to check out the Drink Beer, Think Beer podcast. It's available on all of the major platforms, and the weekly show features long-form conversations with brewers, growers, and personalities from the beer industry. New episodes release every Wednesday. Just search Drink Beer, Think Beer.
And we're back with John Rowley of Rowley Farmhouse Ales. I got to ask you about farmhouse ales because I really don't know. I work part-time at a brewery in Connecticut, and we make farmhouse ales, mixed fermentation, really nice, long-tended, bottle-conditioned sours. And people always go, what's a farmhouse ale? And then we have to kind of go through, I used to go, oh, they're sour. And my boss would be like, no, you can't just call them sours. And he goes, and then you have to walk through like tart, wild, fun. You kind of have to tick all these boxes.
It's a thing.
But that still doesn't really explain what a farmhouse ale is and why we call it that, because there's also farmhouse ales. Like I think of Saison DuPont as a farmhouse ale, and that's clean. So in your opinion, why did you latch onto that in the title of your brewery?
Well, I also don't really care for the term because it is so broad and it could mean so many different things. And it means different things to different people. But I think at the time that we were trying to come up with a name, that it just kind of fell into place and we said, oh, fuck it. It's okay. Let's go with it. Pardon my French. I don't know what the rules are for that.
You can swear. I'm sure.
You can say any fucking word you want.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. I don't want to offend anyone, but I do have an East Coast tongue. So the term is, I don't know, it is kind of hokey, and we do get that constantly as well. So what we did was, and I can't remember where I found this. There was like a treatise on farmhouse ales. It wasn't Scratch, because that was like, oh, you have to brew the beer on a farm. It wasn't anything like that. There was like this distinct description about what farmhouse ales were, and so we actually had it laser engraved on the back of our menu boards. And I don't think it's on all of them, but it's on some of them. So if someone like is really like a shitbag customer, and we don't have a whole lot of them, but occasionally they're
because I haven't been there yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, fair. I'll give you the wood and say, hey, read this.
Yes.
But if it's someone that wants to be engaged and truly, I feel like wants to hear about it, I'll try to give them the spiel. But yeah, it is pretty. It's kind of a crazy term because it covers so much. It's too broad. I mean, it can mean so many different things. Yeah, I can't really give you a really good reason other than it sounded good at the time, and we stuck with it. But yeah, you have the clean side of it, which is, you have the Saison and its kind of sister beer, the Grisette, and then you have the Bière de Garde. Those are kind of the two veins in like, the farmhouse guidelines, if you will. Maybe BJCP guidelines. Obviously, it won't be in the
Yeah, or
The-
Phil Markowski's book, Farmhouse Ales.
yeah. Like,
No.
I mean, that kind of goes more into like these neoclassical versions, like the clean versions, like, early stainless brewing kind of thing. And, they don't really go crazy about it. It doesn't really go past, like, way far into the past, right? Because, I mean, I don't know if anyone really knows a whole lot about it. I mean, there's a lot of conjecture, and I'm sure there are historians that are willing to go into that and dive deep and find old texts and really get into it. But I mean, I imagine before Saison DuPont, before any kind of industrial brewing started to take place, that, beers brewed on farms were funky.
Yeah.
They had to be, right? They didn't have
Guaranteed.
iodophore. They didn't have steam. They didn't have stainless steel. They were just brewing in wood. Probably brewing in a barrel. I mean, they're, if you go back to the Norwegian ones, they're using a stick to inoculate the beer,
Yeah.
right? Who knows what was on that stick other than the yeast they thought was on it? I mean, it can be all kinds of shit. You never know. That's the beauty of it. It's this kind of wild part of brewing, and not like Wild West, like let's shoot them up kind of stuff, but just anything. It can be anything. It's definitely like anti-Reinheitsgebot. And I kind of like that. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, you have to appreciate Reinheitsgebot, making the same clean beer over and over with very limited ingredients and doing it so well that, there's a lot to be said for that. I love those beers. But there's also a romance, like I kind of alluded to before, in all of this crazy mixed culture stuff and how it comes out. And I mean, it can go really wrong too. But that's less of a problem these days. I think people they understand how to make these beers, and it's not rocket science. Yeah, but those I really like the wild side of it more than the neoclassical Saison DuPont. No, I'm not knocking DuPont. DuPont's great. We actually serve it at the bar all the time. It's one of our we have bottles of it. We have it on draft here and there whenever we can get the kegs.
I wanted to ask you about how, in your day-to-day life, you're scientific. I've heard you talk about how you brew your beer using very scientific, you're very scientific about your brewing as well, I think, but how do you straddle the science art divide's not the right word. How do you bring those things together so that your beer isn't rote or contrived, or, how does a scientist find their inner artist, I guess?
Oh, that's beautiful, Don.
Yeah, I think so to me, my day-to-day, scientific career, it's very I'm not going to say monotonous, but we do the same kind of thing over and over. There's paperwork, there's all this, and don't get me wrong, there's paperwork with being a brewmaster. Fuck, there's a lot of paperwork.
Thank you, TTD.
TTB, thank you. Yeah, and middle finger too. And you didn't see that. Yeah, we don't need to get audited. But I think for me, like, coming from the homebrewing side, and I definitely do a little more than most breweries in terms of the TA and things like that. But I mean, that's not really that big a deal. That's just a small measurement. A lot of what we do is kind of art driven. Like, oh, let's try this. What do you think about this? We're spitballing all the time, like coming up with new ideas and fun things to do, and maybe taking like a slightly more artisan approach than you would as a chemist. So a chemist would probably say, okay, I need to acidulate this water to 5.75 pH for my mash. So sure, fine. A lot of breweries do this. It's common practice.
Mhm.
What if you took lemons to do that instead of citric acid, or not citric acid, phosphoric acid? What if you tried a more artisan approach? Hey, let's throw 50 pounds of lemons in that mash with it and see where the pH lands on the mash pH. That's the kind of approach I would take. It's like, hey, let's try a different. Let's try a roundabout way to get to the same place, and maybe there's something special that will come out of it. And I think that definitely works. We've done a lot of like citrus smashes.
Yeah, I read about that on your website. So
yeah, we do that a fair amount. I don't know, maybe a few dozen times now. We won a gold medal at GABF in 2019 with a beer we call Meyer, which was a Meyer lemon goza, where we take, in that case, I think we took 50 pounds of Meyer lemons, we halved them. We used the water as it was. We didn't acidulate it in any way. We didn't use acidulated malt. We mash it with the lemons, and then you get your target pH. You're pretty close. I think we were like 5.1, which is probably a touch low, but it's certainly going to work. I've seen mashes go down to 4.8, 4.7, and they still work. I mean, beer essentially wants to make itself. You just have to steer it. You got to steer the bus a little bit, and it'll go the rest of the way for you. But yeah, I think for me, let's try something unique. Let's do it a little differently and see where it lands. And yeah, you screw it up. Sure. Every brewery is going to make a bad beer, or 12 or whatever. You dump it. You don't have to keep it. You don't have to sell it. That's what the drain's for. So I like to think that we were doing, this is kind of the art side of my life, right? I don't have to be a scientist at the brewery. I can a little bit, and I do, sure. I mean, I'm good at finding the balance there, I believe. I'm a Libra too, so balance. I'm all about the balance. So balance, you got to find the balance.
I wanted to ask as well. Then, I think for most clean brewers, they're making their IPA and their pale ale and their stout and whatever, and they're thinking about mash bill and what hops. In your case, you're thinking about various yeast strains and then bacterial strains. They all behave differently, as you explained with your live lacto, that you got to make sure the lacto does its work first before you add the Saccharomyces, et cetera, et cetera. So what does recipe formulation look like for you?
So a bunch of my recipes have just came from when I was homebrewing, and then they were scaled up. So nowadays it's actually, we're trying to keep it a little more simple if we're coming up with a new recipe. So over time I realized, and I think there was some homebrewer who told me this. I can't remember his name. Denny Kahn. He told me this. He's like, if there's no reason to put that thing in there, don't put it in there. So keep it simple, basically. You keep it simple. Don't add things that just because you think it might be fun or it's a cool new ingredient. There's no need to do that. So we try to formulate recipes that are fairly simple, maybe, depending on what it is. If it's, Berliner or Saison, they're usually pretty 4 ingredients tops in the malt bill. Maybe some malted oats, probably a little bit of oats, but usually 2-row or Pilsner malt. We usually use the Weyermann extra pale pills. I like that stuff. It's good. Costs a little more, but sometimes we use the RAR if we can't get the extra pale pills, supply chain things. But then we use a lot of different wheats. I really like to add wheats. I know the gluten people hate this, but hell, you got to have gluten. What's a good bagel without gluten? It just doesn't taste anything good. The gluten is a part of it. So I use a lot of wheat from Arizona called Sonoran white wheat, which is a raw heritage grain that was real popular in Mexico in the 1800s and before that. But over time, modern strains became more common because they got better yields, use less water, things like that. But Sonoran white wheat is like this yellow orangey kernel, and it's got this amazing flavor. It really pops compared to just standard, winter wheat from the north. But we use a lot of that from a farm there called BKW Farms. There's also a new farmer here. I can't remember his name. He sold us a few bags recently that we've been putting in some of the beers, and it's really good as well. So that's cool that they're growing some closer to us. Arizona is not far, but it's still regional. It's not local. We try to use local ingredients. It's not always possible. There's no real barley program in New Mexico yet. There is one guy that's doing it, and I haven't really tried it yet. I'm kind of waiting for them to get their feet under them a little bit more and see how that works. But one of my friends is Beer Creek Brewing here in Santa Fe. They're brewing with that stuff a lot, and their beer is pretty good. So I think there's hope. And besides that, we might use a little Munich or a little bit more color than that. Usually not caramel malts, but maybe Munich 1 or Munich 2. Things like that for a Saison. You don't need much, just a little bit of color. You don't want it to be straw. You want it to be a little bit more golden in most cases. So, I mean, recipe development is, I don't know. We don't go too crazy. We kind of know the boundaries and we play with those. And my new head brewer, Jennifer True, she's starting to do her own recipes too. And I think she's been doing a great job as well. She's got a lot of experience. So
are you thinking about the microbes as you're developing the recipe, or is that
not necessarily? Sometimes it depends what you're going after. If you're going to try something crazy, then maybe you want to try to feed it a little bit. But usually the Sonoran white wheat is a good starchy type of product for the Brett to chew on for a long time.
Okay.
With that in mind, do you work with like a yeast bank? Or did you create the mixed fermentation strains yourself? Did you work with someone? Like how did that?
So what I did initially, and this is kind of maybe long-winded, but if you want to hear it, you'll get to hear it. So when I was homebrewing, I started using, some of the mixed sour strains from like White Labs or Wyeast. The Wyeast has the Rosalaire. White Labs had a few different ones. I felt like, those things took a long time and they didn't really have a lot of complexity in most cases. The Rosalaire is pretty good. But yeah, 20 months before it peaks. That's a long time. For like a Saison beer, you probably didn't need that. So I started trying to blend my own with other strains, like the Dre strain from BSI. So that's a commercial only, but I was able to get some somehow earlier on. A bunch of different Saison yeasts. At one time, Santa Fe Brewing had this project for like their 25th anniversary, where they were going to brew an imperial Saison, like a 9% Saison, which I think is bastardizing the style a little bit. But that's a different story. But the project was, let's buy every single Saison strain that we can buy commercially. White Labs, Wyeast, you name it. Let's try to find them. And these were meant to be clean versions, Saccharomyces versions, not Brettanomyces driven versions. So they went and bought like 25 or 30 different Saison strains, like vials or smack packs or whatever. They made little starters, and they made a big batch of wort, and they fermented 5-gallon aliquots of that with each different strain. And then they went through and tasted all of them. And they were lucky. I was lucky enough. They invited me over. Like, Rowley knows about Saison. Let's bring him over and help us figure out which ones we want to do. So I spent the day with them drinking all these different beers. So I got a good feel for that. And I was able to get some of the strains from them to build up a little bank of my own. And over time, I started throwing this in. And then I came up with like a lab sort of mixed culture that I was starting to become happy with. And then I threw some cuttings from a lavender bush down the street. So on the dog walk, there's this lavender bush. It looks good. I was like, no one's looking. Cut off a couple pieces. I threw that in some wort, and then I mix that into the culture. So I'm trying to get some more local microflora into it. And then there's this juniper tree that I also see along the dog walk, and like, oh, look at this. This is really nice. These berries look really great. Take some of those berries, throw them in there. And, it was an iterative thing. Over time, I came to this point where, okay, this is really great. I like where this is. And I took that culture and I banked it with BSI in Colorado Springs. And they've had my base bank ever since. So anytime I need to go back to that, I can go back to it, and it's still good. I'm surprised it lasts this long. Even frozen, you would think that it would kill it somehow or another. But we also kind of try to extrapolate from that. Maybe not as much as like a brewery like Jester King that they just keep it alive. They keep going and going and going, and then watch how it changes over time. I'm not willing to go that far. I usually go maybe 5 or 7 life cycles, and then I'll reboot. And if we want to do some wild stuff, we can do that. And wild by adding, we're not doing cool ship beers per se. We have done a few. I don't have a cool ship. So one time we did a collaboration with a brewery in Arizona called 12 West. They had a cool ship on a trailer that I did a collab with them there, and I saw it out in the distance. I'm like, ooh, what is that? So it's a cool ship, but it's too warm here. We can't use it. I'm like, ooh, why don't you drive it up to Santa Fe this winter and we'll use it there? And they did. And we made a beer with that. I also did one in Arizona with Tombstone Brewing Company and a winery there called San Reckoner, where we brewed a bunch of wort. I think 15 barrels of wort in Tombstone. Then we put it in totes, and then we drove it to San Reckoner's winery in the middle of the winter. And we didn't have a cool ship, but they just dumped a bunch of barrels that day. So we spent the early evening. It was starting to get dark. We made a fire, and we were just hanging out, pulling the heads off the barrels. And then we racked the wort into those barrels and left them overnight. And we got shitty on some really good wine. That was fun. But then I had to drive my tote back home the next day, which is like 500 miles. That was not fun. But then we let it ferment, and we put that in barrels. So I've done a little bit of cool shipping and stuff like that. But I think a more economical approach for me, without a cool ship or a space to have a cool ship, is to do cuttings of local micro like plants that I like that look pretty cool, and try to get some off of that. And I've never done any like analysis of that. I think your tongue is a great analyzer. It can tell you whether it's going the right way or not. The problem with this approach is it's highly iterative. It takes time, and it takes effort, right? It's not a one shot kind of thing. I can't go to Y East and say, oh, I want this juniper infused Santa Fe thing. They don't do that. So, it's just not that kind of thing. But yeah, so over time, I've come to this happy space, and I can kind of go left or right from there, depending on the project.
Do you know what's in your base mix then? Like, is it all SAC, or are there?
No. There's probably, I think there was 3 of the commercial Saccharomyces saison strains in there. Then there's probably 2 or 3 different Bretts, plus whatever wild stuff got into it.
Yeah.
And then there was a few different lactos in there too.
Oh, okay.
I used the Del Bruchi was one, and the Brevis, and then maybe whatever else was on any of the plants that I had in there at the time. The thing is that I noticed the wild stuff doesn't usually win out. Those strains are weaker. They tend to not compete in an environment where there's a lot of other like strains that are hardier and will keep going. So I think the wild stuff, it doesn't tend to stick around as much, which is why I like to have it in the bank, because then I can always come back to it, or I can add new stuff to it over time. And we did have another strain that was banked, but I think they lost that one, and that was okay because I liked the original one better. But yeah, it's you can do this a lot of different ways. That's just the way that I chose to do it. I think it was a little more repeatable.
Yeah, well, it's working out for you because you just won another gold medal at GABF for Berliner. And then it was what? Russian River was silver and Jester King was bronze and you were gold. So you're obviously doing something right.
Well, thank you. That was I totally screwed up the numbers, and we kept looking up like, oh, and I thought our entry had come and gone. So I was just like texting with my buddy Paulie, and then my sister, you didn't win, fuck you. And I was like, yeah, we suck. And then they call her name, like, what? Oh shit. How did that happen? I screwed up. Whoops.
And that was for Berliner, right?
No, that was actually a fairly complicated beer. I can tell you about it. So for our 6th anniversary, which was last September, so it's basically roughly 6 weeks ago, I wanted to have a kind of a box set. I wanted to make a box set of different beers. So in 2017, I brewed a beer with Tyler, one of our brewers. He was also there judging with me this past week. I don't know if you met him.
I did. I met him at Rare Beer Fest.
He was at Rare Beer with us.
I drank your beer. What were you?
That was a Berliner.
That was a delicious. Berliner. That was my first beer.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm glad you liked that. That beer is really special too, but it's not. I didn't enter it in any competitions. And I can go back to that beer if you want. But for the anniversary, we made like a winter saison. It's roughly like 7.5%. So that's kind of like the top that I like to be. Saison has kind of morphed over time from, reportedly this quaffable session farmhousey type of beer that the serfs drank, as payment for their work in the fields or whatever. I don't know how that worked, but whatever
that's what they say.
That's whatever that means. I don't know if that's true. I'm not a historian. I wasn't there, but I assume that those beers were lower gravity. They were, these people were intended to go back to work in the field the next day. They weren't intended to be hungover, sleeping on a bale of hay somewhere in some barn all fucked up, right? They were supposed to go back to work. So I assume that these beers were initially meant to be lower gravity and more drinkable and less alcoholic. But Americans, we like to do things in excess. And so I believe I've seen this, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like Saison has morphed into this kind of like 6.5% beer in many cases. And it's a bigger, stronger variant of beer that it probably used to be. I don't know if I'm right or not, but my observations kind of lean towards that. So my version of Saison, the base kind of barrel-aged Saison is usually around 5.5%. And so I wanted to do like a winter version of that. And so 7.5, that's kind of my cap. I don't want to go, I've done a couple bigger ones than that for other reasons, but those had a specific reason. They weren't maybe intended to be, they were big, but they weren't, that's not how I would do it if it was my recipe or something like that. So I'm rambling, but we made this beer. We called it Grand Descente, which is the big brother to our other Saison. This is the winter Saison, and we barrel aged a bunch of it. I released some of it probably like a year later. I think we did like a four times cherry version of it. So we had a lot of cherries, like 4 pounds per gallon or some stupid number like that. It was really cherry-y. It was good though. I liked it. And that was a big hit. We've also done a couple other versions of it. And so at one point I took some yeast from sherry that we cultured up, floor yeast. Right. And floor yeast is a form of Saccharomyces, but it also behaves like Brettanomyces in that it forms a pellicle over the beer to protect it from Acetobacter or other oxygen loving microbes. And I think it does it a little differently than Brettanomyces, which does it in reaction to oxygen, but floor yeast will just do it all the time. So it's kind of a cool thing because it'll just protect the beer from above. Oxygen probably won't get in. There's going to be some micro-oxidative effects from barrels, seeping air in, micro-oxidation is common. But we pitched a bunch of floor yeast in 2 of the barrels. And then we let them go for like 40 months, which is a long time.
Damn.
And I was tasting them. I kind of wanted to see where this goes. Like, okay, this, sherry yeast it's a lot different than your regular Saccharomyces. But I was hoping to see some kind of aging, some delicate aging, not, wet paper bag aging. And so I let that go for 40 months. And then, I tend not to mess with the barrels. I definitely don't want to pull the bungs on them if I don't have to. Because I think the more you play with them, the more you analyze it, the more you like mess with its climate, then the more likely it is to get fucked up. So, I mean, I do the nail thing, the stainless steel nail, the Vinny nail, and occasionally I'll pull a nail and take a taste. And I really liked where those two barrels were going. I was like, oh, this is really good. So it came time to do something with that beer. I figured, okay, let's do a box set, because I wanted to sell it just as plain Flor Saison, but I got to pay the bills. I got to pay the rent. I got to pay electric bills. I got to pay my people. The native version of it, I think, is magnificent. I think it's fantastic. One of the best beers I've ever brewed. Tastes perfect in my mind. But I don't think that could sell. So I added we made a series of different cherries because I like cherries. The first one was Rainer cherries, which are they're light golden cherries. They don't have a lot of flavor, but they're really good for snacking. I could eat a whole bowl of them. If you put them in front of me, I'll just keep eating them. And it's bad, but they're really good. But they're delicate. They don't have a huge. They're not bright red. They don't have like pie cherry type of flavors or anything, but they're really good. And so we did an aliquot of that. We did an aliquot of tart cherries, the Montmorency pie cherries, right? And then we did a blend of those two, Rainer and Montmorency's. And then we bottled all of them in 375s and we sold it as a bag. We didn't do the boxes. We tried to do boxes, but they turned out to be too expensive. So we printed a bag with our logo on it, and we sold that as like a box set for the anniversary. So the Montmorency version was the one I entered in the competition.
Okay.
Because I thought that had the most chance. Because it's definitely.
You were right.
And you were right. Yeah.
I was right. Yeah, it definitely worked. Because it really is great. And yeah, I'll send you guys some. It's really good.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Thank you. Yes, please.
So I'm really excited that we won that medal. I mean, I didn't think we were going to win it, but we did. And
and it just goes to show how much work it goes into winning a gold medal, right? But on that gold medal note, we are out of time, John. So wow, I was. That's amazing how much
Don wants to have you back. Don wants to have you back. He has so many questions.
I do.
Okay, so why don't we call this volume 1?
Yeah.
And then we'll
Okay.
do volume 2, volume 3
and then
later on.
You will get the box set that you wanted. It'll just be a podcast box set.
Yeah.
Okay, even better. I mean, I'm happy to come on and talk to you guys. It seems like we have good chemistry and things are moving in the right direction.
Coming from a chemist too, that's high praise.
Hey, yeah.
So John, thank you very much.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Em. So what did you learn?
A lot. There's so many things he's doing. Citrus mashing, like live cold, like
yeah, I've never heard of that. That's cool. And
things,
I love I love the creativity that goes into even that idea, right?
This is the thing I love about beer is that I think I know a fair amount about beer, not to be a jerk, but and you do too. But there is always something new to learn. And John is doing things at Rowley Farmhouse Ales that I didn't even think about, and then he's doing them and he's winning medals and being incredibly successful at it. And it's just really, he's got such a unique take and a refreshing take on beer that I really enjoyed our conversation with him.
Yeah, me too. Awesome. Yeah, it was a great episode. Visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer, and also visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer to support this show and others.
If you have any questions for the experts, email podcast@allaboutbeer.com. That's also the email for feedback, suggestions, or to inquire about supporting this show through advertising. Speaking of advertising, let's hear a short word from our sponsor.
Hi, this is John Hall, the editor of All About Beer, inviting you to check out the Drink Beer, Think Beer podcast. It's available on all of the major platforms, and the weekly show features long-form conversations with brewers, growers, and personalities from the beer industry. New episodes release every Wednesday. Just search Drink Beer, Think Beer.
Hey, Don, before we go, how can people reach out to you?
On social media, I am at the Dawn of Beer, and my email address, if people want to drop me a note, I am don@thedawnofbeer.com. And yourself?
My website is www.pintsandpanels.com, and I'm across all social media platforms at Pints and Panels. This show is produced by All About Beer. Visit allaboutbeer.com for articles, notes on the show and others, and to connect via the newsletter and social media. Cheers! Keep drinking great beer.
Cheers.